was a Texas boy, and he could rope, you bet. And the steer that Windy had not tied, he had not met him yet. But the boys, they tell of a big red steer that was kind of an old outlaw, who lived way out in the Malpais at the end of a rocky draw. That big red steer had stood his ground against punchers throughout the West, and the boys bet Windy 10-1 he'd come out second best. So he lassoed his favorite roping horse's back and his withers raw, and prepared to tackle that big red steer that lived down in that draw. With his samstack tree and his brisles bit and his shaps and his taps to boot, had his old McGee tied hard and fast, Bill set out to catch that brute. Well, that little rope horse, he sauntered around and that steer began to paw. Then he stuck his tail straight up in the air and he drifted down through that draw. That little rope horse took after him like he'd been eating corn, and Windy stuck that old McGee right around that big steer's horns. That little rope horse, he shut her right down in the cinch and broke like a straw, and the old McGee and the samstack tree went a-drifting through that draw. Windy landed in a pile of rocks, his hands and his face was scratched. He reckoned he could rope about any old thing, but he'd finally met his match. So he paid his bets off like a man, and he didn't give him no jaw, and allowed as how that old steer was the boss of everything down in that draw. This story has a moral, folks, and you can plainly see. When you toss a loop around a big steer's horns, don't you tie hard your McGee, but you take your dallies like a man to the California law, and you won't see your rope and saddle go drifting through that draw. See your rope and saddle go drifting down through the draw. We was camped out on the plains at the head of the Cimarron, when along comes a stranger and he stops to augur some. He looked so very foolish, we began to look around. We figured he was a greenhorn that had just escaped from town. So we asked if he'd had breakfast, and he hadn't had a smear. So we opens up our chuck box and we bade him take a share. He took a little beefsteak, some biscuits and some beans, and then he began to talk about some foreign kings and queens. All about the Spanish wars and the fighting ships at seas, with guns as big as beef steers and ramrods big as trees. And about old Bucky O'Neill, he was a fighting son of a gun. I reckon the prettiest critter that ever pulled a gun. When that dude had finished eating, he put his plate away. He rolled himself a cigarette and he asked the time of day. He talked about the weather and the politics and such things, but he didn't seem to know so much about working on the range. All that educated feller, his thoughts just came in herds. He astonished us poor punchers with them jaw-breaking words. He just kept on a-talking till he made the boys all sick, and they began to look around for how to play a trick. Well, he said he'd lost his job, it was on the Santa Fe. He's a-walking across the prairie to join up with a flying A. He didn't say how come it, just some trouble with the boss. But he said he'd like to borrow a nice fat saddle horse. Oh, that dang near tickled the boys to death, they laughed way down their sleeves. They said you can have a horse as fat and gentle as you please. So Shorty grabbed his lariat and he rode that zebra dun. And we turned him to the stranger and set back to watch the fun. Oh, that dun, he was an outlaw that had grown so awful wild. He could haul the white right off of the moon and for every jump a mile. But he'd always just stood there as if he didn't know, until he was all saddled and ready for the go. When that stranger hit the saddle, oh, Dunny quit the earth, and he headed up in the air for all that he was worth. A pitching and a squealing and a having wall-eyed fits, his hind feet perpendicular and his front ones in the bits. You could see the tops of mountains under Dunny every jump, but the stranger was glued there just like a camel's hump. Then he rolled himself a cigarette and he curled his black mustache, just like a summer boarder a-waiting for the hash. Then he thumped him in the shoulders and he spurred him when he whirled, and he showed us flunky punchers he's the lion of his world. And when he was dismounted and once again upon the ground, we knowed he was a thoroughbred and not some gent from town. Now the boss was a-standing and a-watching all the show. He walked right up to him and he asked him not to go. If you can throw a lariat like you rode that zebra dun, you're just the man I've been looking for ever since the year of one. Oh, he could throw a lariat and he didn't do it slow. And when them cows stampeded, he was always on the go. There's one thing and a sure thing I've learned since I was born: every educated feller ain't some plum greenhorn. The devil in hell, we're told, was chained for 1,000 years, and there he remained. But he neither complained nor did he moan, but was determined to start a hell of his own, where he could torment the souls of men without being chained up in a prison bin. And so he asked the Lord if he had on hand anything left when he made this land. And the Lord said, "Yes, sir. That's a pretty big order, but I left some down there by the Mexican border. But you see, the fact is, old boy, that old stuff's so poor that I don't think you could use it as a hell anymore." Well, the devil went down to look at the truck, and he said that if he took it, he knew he was stuck. For after looking it over carefully and well, he said this place is too dry for a suitable hell. But in order to get it off of his hand, well, the Lord promised the devil to water the land, and so trade was closed and deed was given, and the Lord went back to his home in heaven. And the devil said, "Now I've got all that's needed to build a good hell," and he succeeded. He began by putting thorns on the trees, and he mixed up the sand with millions of fleas. He scattered tarantulas all along the roads, put thorns on cactus and horns on toads. He lengthened the horn of the Texas steer, and he put an addition to the rabbit's ear. He put a little dapo in the bronco steed, and he poisoned the feet of the centipede. The rattlesnake bites you and the scorpion stings, and the mosquitoes delight you with their buzzing wings. The sandburrs are there and so are the ants. Why, they say if you sit down, you need half soles on the seats of your pants. The heat in the summer's 110. It's too hot for the devil. It's too hot for women and men. But the javelina roams on the high chaparral. That's a hell of a place that he has for a hell. And the wild peppers grows on the banks of the brooks, and the Mexicans use them at all that they cook. Why, you just dine with one of them and you're bound to shout, "Woo! Now I've got hell on the inside of me too, as well as the out." Well, his work all done, he spread out his old devil wings, and away he flew. And he vanished forever into a blazing red hue. And no doubt somewhere in some old corner of hell, he gloats over this place that he's created so well. And he vows that Arizona can never be beat for thorns and rattlesnakes and scorpions and heat. And he looks once again at this place he's created so well. And he says, by golly, I got a place there that's even meaner than hell. I'll tell you a sad, sad story of how a cowboy fell from grace. This one is really pretty awful. I've never heard so sad a case. I once had me a partner, I never know one quite so good. So we throwed our outfits together and we lived like cowboys should. He savvied all about wild cattle, he's mighty handy with a rope. And for a gentle, well-reined pony, just give me one that he had broke. He owned no clothes except Levi's, and he wore 'em till they was slick. And he had no wide brim Stetson, 'cause where we rode that brush was too thick. He had no time for women, so bashful and shy was he. Besides, he knowed they was poison, so he always let them be. Well, he rode off to distant ranges, I never seen him for a year. But I had no cause to worry, for I know someday he'd appear. I rode in from the mountains, feeling good and stepping light, 'cause I just sold off all my yearlings and that price was out of sight. But I seen a sight so awful it caused my joy to fade away. It filled my soul with sorrow, and I'll never forget that day. For down the street a-comin' 'twas my partner as of yore. And I know you won't believe me when I tell you what he wore. His boots was outside of his breeches, made of leather, green and red. He had a shirt of a dozen colors on, loud enough to wake the dead. Round his neck he had a kerchief knotted through a silver ring. I swear to God he had a wristwatch on. Whoever heard of such a thing? Says I, old scout, what's the matter? You done it, some local weed. If you tell me what you're a-wantin', I'll get you anything you need. Well, he stared at me for a moment, and then he began to bawl. He says, bear with me and I'll tell you what made me take this awful fall. Was a woman from Chicago put that engine sign on me. She told me I was romantic and as handsome as could be. Says there ain't a thing you can do, pard, to save my old laundry hide. I'm wrangling dudes instead of cattle. I'm what they call a first-class guide. I saddles their pump-tail ponies, fixes their stirrups for 'em too, and I boosts 'em into their saddles. They gives me tips when I am through. It's like a horse that's been eating that local weed. You can't quit even if you try. I'll wrangle them dudes forever, or at least until I die. Well, I drawed my old gun, throwed it on him. I had to turn my face away, and I shot him right square in the middle, and where he fell I left him lay. I surely hated to do it, for what's been done you can't recall. But when a cowboy turns dude Wrangler, he just ain't no good at all. Way up high in the muggy owns, above the mountain tops, a lion cleaned a yearling's bones and licked his thankful chops. When who upon the scene should ride a trippin' down the slope? High Chin Bob with sinful pride and a maverick hungry rope. Oh, glory be to me, says he, and fame's unfading flower. I ride my top horse here today, 'cause I'm top hand of the Lazy J. Hello, kitty cat, you're ours. The lion cleaned his paw so brown, and he dreamed sweet dreams of veal, when a big wide loop come circling down and roped him around his meal. He yowled wild fury to the hills, and all the hills yowled back. The top horse gave a snort and whirled, and Bob took up the slack. Oh, glory be to me, says he, we'll hit that glory trail. No man has roped a lion's head and lived to drag that critter dead, till I shall tell the tale. Well, away up high in the muggy owns, the top horse done his best, through whipping brush and rattling stones and canyon floors to crest. Whenever Bobby turned and hoped the limp remains to find, a red-eyed lion, belly roped but healthy, loped behind. Oh, glory be to me, says he, this glory trail is rough. But I'll keep my dallies around this horn until the toot of judgment morn, before I'll holler enough. 3 sons that rode their circles home beyond that desert rim, and turned their star herds free to roam the ranges high and dim. Get up and down and around and across, Bob pounded weak and wan. Pride still glued him to his horse and glory drove him on. Oh, glory be to me, says he can't be drugged to death. Those heroes that I've read about were only fools that stuck it out till the end of mortal breath. Way up high in the muggy owns, if you're ever up there at night, you'll hear a ruckus amidst the stones, it'll lift your hair in fright. You'll see a cow horse thunder by with a lion trailing along, and a rider gaunt but chin on high sing forth his glory song. Oh, glory be to me, says he, and to my mighty noose I took a raging dream in tow, and though I never laid him low, I'll never turn him loose. Yavapai Pete was a cowpuncher neat from Arizona's fair climes. He lived in the saddle and he punched most the cattle from here to the Mexican line. His riding was sassy, his roping was classy. He loved to mix, mingle, and maul. Not much of a thinker, he was more of a drinker. He could hold up his end in a brawl. He had a face like a hatchet, had a head made to match it, had a nose like a pelican's beak. His legs was all bowed and he was pigeon-toed, with a chin that was plumb mild and meek. He lived in the weather, his skin was like leather, his hands was all horny and rough. You could tell by his stride he was just made to ride, and no bronc for him was too tough. He was a good hand, had a whole lot of sand, had a voice like a Bellerin' bull. Pretty much of a brag and at chewing a rag, he was a whole corral fool. They once told a tale about hitting the trail, seeking new ranges to ride. For they'd hung up a bounty in Yavapai County for whoever could bring in his hide. So he rode to a ranch and he asked if by chance they needed a good buckaroo. They says, you look tough, but you ain't rough enough. As a bronc peeler, you just won't do. So he rode over a rise, just a batting his eyes and a looking down into a swale. And he came to the lair of a she-grizzly bear, and she was out holding the trail. He took a long strand of barbed wire in hand and a crawling along on the ground. He made a big loop with that barbed wire hoop, and they went around and around. He mounted that bear with a handful of hair, and for a quirt used a live rattlesnake. And they rode in a rush back down through the brush, a-swearing this beast he would break. To the ranch he did go, then old Pete hollered, whoa, when he asked the boss what he would pay. He said, my mount is docile, I just rid her a mile, and we're out job hunting today. Oh, the boss called his stack, says, come into the shack, I think that you might be all right. For that growling she-bear that you're riding right there just ate up my range ranch boss last night. Oh, Yavapai Pete, he couldn't be beat at hootin' and shootin' and sin. And the chuck wagon deck was a sorrowful wreck when old Yavapai Pete butted in. He fanned his guns fast, but they got him at last, and he died with his boots on his feet. And Arizona was rid of a dangerous kid with the passing of Yavapai Pete. The Sierry Pete's where the yeller pines grows tall. Old Sandy Bob and Buster Jig had a rotor camp last fall. They'd taken their horses in the running irons and maybe a dog or two. And the loudest howl they'd brand every steer that come within their view. And any old ogie that flapped long ears and didn't push up by day got his long ears twiddled and his old hide sizzled in a most artistic way. He throwed his seagull down. Says, I'm sick of the smell of this burning hair, and how loud I'm a-going to town. So the saddle's up and he hits them a lope where it weren't no side of a ride. Both them was the days when the good buckaroos could oil up their insides. They starts her in at the Kentucky bar at the head of Whiskey Road, and winds up down by the depot house some 40 drinks below. Sets up and they turns her around and they goes back the other way. And to tell you the God-forsaken truth, them boys got stewed that day. As they was a-heading back to camp, a-packing in a pretty good load. Who should they meet but the devil himself a-prancing down the road. Says he, you ornery cowboy skunks, you better hunt your hoes, 'cause I've come up from hell's rim rock, I'm gonna gather in your souls. Sandy Bob, old devil be damned, we boys is kinda tight. But you ain't gonna gather no cowboy soul without you have some kind of a fight. So Sandy Bob punched a hole in his rope and he swang her straight and true. He lapped it on to that devil's horns and he's taking his dallies too. Now Buster Jig's a riata man with his gut line coiled up neat. He shook her out and he built him a loop and he laps that devil's hind feet. Stretched him out and they tailed him down, and while the irons was a-getting hot, they cropped and swallowed, forked his ears, and branded him up a lot. They pruned him up with a dehorn and saw, then knotted his tail for a joke. They then rid off and left him there, neck to a blackjack oak. If you're ever up in the Sierry Pete's and you hear one hell of a wail, you'll know it's that devil, he's a feller around about them knots in his tail. If you're ever up in the Sierry Pete's and you hear one hell of a wail, you'll know it's that devil, he's a feller around about them knots in his tail. Two cowboys rode out of camp one day to lead in a bald-faced steer. And what befell them along the way you now are going to hear. As they was a-riding through the brush a-coming round the hill, all at once they came upon a hidden moonshine still. The moonshiner heard them a-coming through the brush, and he thought that the sheriff had him for sure, so he lit out in a rush. Says one old boy to the other old boy, now this here ain't too clear. the name of this contraption here. The coil was a gas line stole from a Ford, the still was a coal oil can. But down from the spout and into the jug the old corn liquor ran. Them boys got down to half that jug and they found her full pretty nigh. So they each took a snort right then and there, for they was powerfully dry. Says one, "Oh boy, let's go from here, 'cause we've got work to do." So they got on the horses and they rode away, and that jug it went along too. When they got to the place where old Steer was tied, they was feeling mighty frisky, for they had stopped all along the way to tilt that jug of corn whiskey. Says one, "Oh boy, that's the dangest steer that ever I did find. He's got 2 heads and a dozen legs and 14 tails behind. How they got that oxen loose from the tree, it would be hard to tell. But when they tried to lead him in, it seems they just had hell." Steer bowled up and sold again, and it seemed that he never would lead. So they figured that a jolt of moonshine was the very thing he'd need. So they rolled old Steer up on his back and they held him by the horns, and down his sizzling goozle they poured a quart of corn. Says one, "Oh boy, let's turn him loose and head him for home real quick. He's bound to want him a chaser, and he'll run right straight to the creek." That bald-faced steer, he pawed the ground, he bawled and he bellered too. He walled his eyes, he wrung his tail, and he shook his hocks and he flew. That oxen simply left this world as hard as he could go, and if he kept on a-drifting, he's down in Mexico. This story has a moral, and you will find it here. If you ever have any moonshine, don't waste none on no steer. I was snapping out broncs at the old Flying U. For 40 a month I'm a good buckaroo. But the boss comes around and he says, "Say my lad, you look pretty good riding horses, that's bad. But you see I ain't got no more bad ones to break, so I'll buy you a ticket and give you a stake. At riding them outlaws, well, you ain't so slow. You might do all right at the big rodeo." So pack up your saddle and be on your way, and it looks like you might be a champion someday. Get on 'em and ride 'em, and when you are through, just tell 'em you learned at the old Flying U. Lay off of that hard liquor and don't get too full, and I think you might tame that old bad Brahma Bull. He's mean as they make 'em, and don't you forget, he's hurt many a twister and he's never been set. So I wrap up my rigging and I starts making dust, hunting that show with that bad bull to bust. I enter the contest and I pay 'em their fee, and I tells 'em to look out, the champion, that's me. So bring on your bad ones, I know you've got none that can set me to guessing or bother me some. I'm betting this bankroll and my outfit besides that you ain't got nothing I can't scratch and ride. They looked me all over and they said, "He's plumb full, let's give him a seat on that bad Brahma Bull." Says I good enough, boys, and I don't like to brag, but I've come a long way just to settle that stag. You say he's a bad one, and I guess he may be, but he looks like a suckling or a wiener to me. When he's saddled, I say, boys, I'm ready right now. You want this thing rode, I will show you all how. So while they're up putting that bull in the chutes, I'm strapping the spurs to the heels of my boots. I look that bull over, and to my surprise, he's a foot and a half in between his two eyes. On top of his shoulders, he's got a big hump, so I take a deep seat just behind that big lump. I lights in his middle and I lets out a scream. He's out with a beller and the rest is a dream. He jumps to his left but he lands to the right. I ain't a greenhorn, so I'm sitting there tight. The dust starts to fogging right out of his skin. He's a-waving his horns right in under my chin. That sun in his belly, he couldn't be beat. He's showing the buzzards the soles of his feet. He's dipping so low that my boots fill with dirt. He's a-making a whip with the tail of my shirt. He's snapping the buttons right off of my clothes, a-bucking and a-bawling and a-blowing his nose. The crowd is a-cheering both me and that bull. He needed no help while my hands are both full. Then he goes to fence roving and a-weaving behind. My head starts to snapping, I sorta went blind. He goes to skydiving and I lets out a groan. We goes up together, but he comes back alone. On high turns over and below I can see he's a-pawing the dirt and a-waiting for me. I can picture a grave and a big slab of wood, saying here lies a twister that thought he was good. Then something I noticed don't seem to be true, but the brand on his hip was a big flying U. I comes back to earth and I lets out a yelp. I'm plumb terror stricken and I'm howling for help. I jump to my feet, but I've got enough sense to outrun that bull to a hole in the fence. I dive through that hole and I want you to know I ain't going back to no Wild West show. At straddling them Brahmas, you can bet I'm all through. I'm sore footing it back to the old Flying U. I was hanging around town just a spending my time. I was out of a job and not earning a dime, when a fella steps up and he said, I suppose that you're a bronc rider from the looks of your clothes. Oh, you figures me right, I'm a good one, I claim. Do you happen to have any bad ones to tame? He says, I've got one, I got a bad one to buck. At throwing good riders, he's had lots of luck. So I get all head up and I ask what he pays to ride this old nag for a couple of days. He offers me 10 and I said, I'm your man. The bronc ain't alive that I cannot fan. So he says, get your saddle, I'll give you a chance. We hops in the buckboard, we drives to the ranch. I waited till morning, and right after Chuck, I stepped out to see if this outlaw could buck. Down in the horse corral, standing alone, was an old caballo, a strawberry roan. His legs were all spavin' and he had pigeon toes, little pig eyes and a big Roman nose, little pin ears that touched at the tip. A big 44 brand was on his left hip. Ewe-necked and all, and a long lower jaw. I could see with one eye he's a regular outlaw. I puts the blinds on him, and it sure is a fright. Next comes the saddle, then I screwed her down tight. Then I steps on him and I raise up the blinds. Get out of the way, boys, he's gonna unwind. He sure is a frog walker and he heaves a big sigh. He only lacks wings for to be on the fly. Turns his old belly right up to the sun. He sure is a sun-fishing son of a gun. He's about the worst bucker that I've seen on the range. He'll turn on a nickel and give you some change. Hits on all four and he goes up on high. He leaves me a-spinning up there in the sky. I turns over twice and I comes back to earth. I lights into cussin' the day of his birth. I know there are ponies that I cannot ride. There's some of them left, Lord, they haven't all died. But I bet all my money the man ain't alive that'll stay with Strawberry when he makes his high dive. We're the children of the open, and we hate the haunts of men. But we had to come to town to get the mail. We were riding home at daybreak, 'cause the air is cooler then, all exceptin' one of us that stopped off at the jail. Shorty's nose won't bear paradin', and Bill's off eye is darkly fadin'. All our toilets show a touch of disarray. For we have found that city life is a constant round of strife, and we ain't the breed for shying from a fray. So chant your war hoops, partners dear, while the east turns pale with fear, and the chaparral is trembling all around. For we're wicked to the marrow. We're a midnight dream of terror when we're riding up the rocky trail from town. We acquired our hasty tempers from our friend the centipede. From the rattlesnake we learned to guard our rights. We have gathered fighting pointers from the famous bronco steed, and the bobcat teached us repartee that bites. So when some high-collared heron jeered the garb that I was wearing, 'twasn't long till we got where talking ends, and he ate his ill-bred chat with a sauce of a derby hat, while my merry partners entertained his friends. So sing her out, my buckaroos, let the desert hear the news, tell the stars how we rub the hottie down. We're the fiercest wolves a-prowlin', and it's just our night for howlin' when we're riding up the rocky trail from town. Since the days that Lot and Abram split the Jordan range in halves, just to fix it so their punchers wouldn't fight. And old Jacob skinned his dad-in-law for 6 years' crops of calves, and then hit the trail for Canaan in the night. There has been a taste for battle amongst the men that follow cattle, and the love for doing things that's wild and strange. And the warmth of Laban's words when he missed his speckled herds still is useful in the language of the range. So sing her out, my bold coyotes, leather fists and leather throats, for we wear the brand of Ishmael like a crown. We're the sons of desolation. We're the outlaws of creation. Yeah, when we're riding up the rocky trail from town. The idol of an age turned to legends, my friends. But the traillist has settled and the cow towns are gone. Their ghosts ride the range and the legends live on. It was down in South Texas where the legend began, gathering wild cattle on the old Rio Grande. They drove 'em up to Kansas on the old Chisholm Trail, to Abilene town and the K&P rail. And the legends grew tall as they spread o'er the west, knight errants on horseback on a romantic quest. They could ride tornadoes and push back the pain, fight grizzlies bare knuckle, put the devil to shame. But the real life of a cowboy, apart from the myth, was toiling in the hot sun or a blue northern wind. Riding and roping was the main stock in trade. No prouder profession, the legend was made. The wide open spaces they claimed as their own, the freest hired hand this world's ever known. Like a poker chip, he's homeless, he drifts like the wind. His workbench a saddle, a good horse's best friend. Across this great land, the trails that they left are cut deep in the sand. They'll never plow under what the cowhand stood for, those hard-riding heroes of legend and lore. Call them legends in Levi's, the last paladins, the idol of an age turned to legends, my friends. But the trail dust has settled and the cow towns are gone. Their ghosts ride the range and the legends live on.